The question I want to ask today, unpack, get into, swim around in, slick my hair back with, is the question of Zen as a really radical spiritual practice and a radical discipline. We're going to approach this question of, is Zen a truly radical teaching to the point where it might not even be Buddhism? Through the prism of the teaching of anatta, or not self. And we're going to use as a doorway into the vast mansion of this strange and difficult, even haunting question. We will use as a doorway to that. An email exchange I've been having with a good friend of mine and a patron who was and kind of still is, I believe, a Zen practitioner, but he's become kind of a skeptic too. Let's get into his question. Your recent video says, not self is a core teaching of Zen and of Buddhism. My opinion is that that is half true at best. People who have studied the Pali Canon assert that Buddha never said there is no self. When asked directly whether there is or is not a self, he remained silent, seeing the debate as not helpful to the practice of the path. So some people may teach anatta, although that seems ill-advised to me personally, maybe even harmful. Traditional Buddhism does not. He says, having a mature and well-integrated self is vital. It is to me, anyway. And we go back and forth. I can see in my emails here that it's like this is a can of worms, and I'm just like cracking it and peeking inside, and I can see the infinity of worms inside the can. And I was like, okay, but see, it's got me thinking about it. You know, I say a few things. Here's the most important thing I think I said, which makes sense to me. For me, the teaching of anatta means that there is a point after which worrying about myself is counterproductive. Dave says, I think we are agreeing, almost. My point is that anatta is decidedly not Buddhist. Whether it is Zen is open to question. It could be, though my teachers never taught anatta. I have serious doubts that Zen is Buddhism anyway. It's just Zen. He says, in conversation with my Thai forest friend, he's got a friend who's I believe a Theravadan monk, a Thai forest monk in the Theravadan tradition, I am struck that he sees a given real-life situation in terms of the four truths, not at all the Zen approach. A Zen outlook genuinely surprises him as a Buddhist. Doing what my friend does, using an orthodox Buddhist method, makes more sense to me and is more practicable than the rather nebulous techniques of Zen. You may agree with him. When the excrement hits the spinning blades, what would Zen have me do? When the fit hits the Shan, what's up? He didn't say that. Where the rubber meets the road, realizing emptiness or being totally present is just not helpful. Right view, renunciation, goodwill, non-harming is. The first step of the Eightfold Path is right understanding, after all. Right understanding is understanding the Four Noble Truths, and the other 7 steps have as their aim circling you right back to right understanding. Right understanding is not appreciating emptiness. It is grasping the Four Noble Truths. Goes on to say, with all due respect to Bodhidharma and Dogen, it seems to me that they pale in comparison to the Buddha. The world-honored one has much more crad. Jesus has more credibility than Paul or any of the saints. To me, anyway. So, serious conversation here about, it's like an existential crisis with regards to Zen practice. Is Zen focusing on the wrong things in a way that is counterproductive and unhelpful and ultimately antithetical to Buddhism itself. Bros, homies, homegirls, this is practice just too out there, too radical, and wrong. So first of all, every time I do a video where I mention anatta or the teaching of not self, every time I get an email about this, about similar to what my friend Dave is saying here. And I'm asking for it when I do these videos, because this is one of those things my teacher, to my memory, never specifically talked about the teachings of not self. He had different ways of yelling at us for being attached to ways of wanting the world to be other than it is, and reducing all of these aims or these desires to kind of one illusion or misconception. And he would call that standing unconditionally on the I am self. And he would say that's wrong. Now, I guess I keep returning to the teachings of anatta in these videos because two moments are coming to me now. One was when I was studying with Lama Oli Nidal's group in Los Angeles. It was the very first group that I ever studied Buddhism with. And I went to the house of this guy and his wife. They were from somewhere in Europe, and they had won the lottery to get an American citizenship, and they had no money. They were literally living in a closet. They were living, and so it was like, it felt kind of weird to me. It was the wife and the guy and me, like kind of sitting on their bed, and I wondered if this wasn't some kind of open marriage situation, because it was very strange. But it was so beautiful. They were really excited about Buddhism. And it was through them that I first got this teaching of questioning the self. For the very first time in my life, this Catholic boy who then studied philosophy in college, Western philosophy, who had reified over and over and over the idea that he had to fix himself, that there is a soul inside of him which goes on for infinity, okay? That it is eternal. It is created by God. It is stuck in a body, and the actions I make with that body can taint or glorify that soul. And when I die, that soul will go on for eternity and live in heaven or hell. Like, the idea of a solid thing that is me was drilled into my head, and maybe yours, from day one of my life. And when I met this couple in Lama Oli Nidal's group, they said, you should question that. It might not be true. It might be more like the universe, let's say, is a tree, and you're an apple growing on a branch of the tree, and you see your brown spots forming, or you see the wasps circling, and you get terrified. And they're like, of course you're going to get terrified, because you're identifying as the apple. But feel the nutrients coming through the roots, and feel the sun hitting the leaves, and the photosynthesis that's feeding your very being. Shift your point of view to a bigger perspective and a bigger picture, and this view of the self of yourself is put into perspective. And when they helped me see this through conversation, through Socratic dialogue, there was a shift that happened in my head. It happened later on when I went through a lot of different Buddhist practices, and then I met my Zen mentor. And I remember one time we were driving down the freeway, and he was hammering me with my where I was going wrong. And he was pointing out that I was putting too much emphasis on the self, or myself, or this, me, I am. And he was saying you can't have something in the foreground if you don't have the background. So the two exist interdependently. There's no you without me. And he went on in very sophisticated Tathagata Zen terms to describe how this me arises from an interpenetration of ingredients, which in Buddhism are called the 5 skandhas. Okay, so let's talk skandhas, baby. I'm getting this from a book by Glenn Wallace called The Basic Teachings of the Buddha, which I really find to be a wonderful book. I'll hold it up here again. It helped me out a lot when I was at our temple in Los Angeles giving Dharma talks every Sunday. I would often refer to this and get some inspiration. So this is from the Anatalakkhana Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 3:2259. It's Sutta 7 in Glenn Wallace's book, and he titles this chapter, Evidence of Selflessness. So if we want to address the question of whether or not Zen is Buddhism, and whether or not anatta, or not self, or don't take yourself too seriously, if that is at all Buddhist, we can trace, we can answer that question with this chapter. And we can see what the historical Buddha figure does here. He doesn't teach not self. Instead, he deconstructs people's idea of what the self is and shows them that the different things they think might be the self are probably not the self. So he gets people to question what my teacher used to call standing unconditionally on the I am self. He gets them to reflect on that. Okay, so he says, you know, the body does not constitute a self. If the body constituted a self, then it would not give us trouble, and it would be possible to manipulate the body, to say, let my body be this way, let my body not be that way. But we can't do that, so the body is not the self. Then he says, feeling does not constitute a self. If feeling constituted a self, then it would not give us trouble, and it would be possible to manipulate it by saying, let me feel this way or that way. He goes on to say, perception does not constitute a self. If perception constituted a self, it would not give us trouble. Conceptual fabrications do not constitute a self. If they did, they would not give us trouble, etc. Cognizance does not constitute a self. If it did, that would not give us trouble. It would be possible to say, let my cognizance be this way, let my cognizance not be that way. So these are the 5 skandhas, right? Cognizance, or consciousness, conceptual fabrications, or mental formations, perception, feeling, and the body. He's basically saying none of these things can be reduced to an entity that we call the self. He says, whatever feeling, perception, conceptual fabrications, and cognizance there is, whether past, present, or future, internal or external, subtle or massive, inconsequential or exalted, distant or near, each of these should be seen with thorough understanding for what it is. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. So when I read this, I find a gap opens up for me. A nice feeling of freedom. Okay, so the Buddha, you know, I carry with me. Okay, I need to point this out. In my videos, when I talk about anatta, I always say there is no fixed, permanent self. I say the self is ephemeral or changing. It is impermanent, unfixed, okay? Never have I said there is no self. There is no teaching of absolutely no self. That is more of an Advaita Vedanta teaching. Now somebody's going to yell at me for that, okay, go ahead. Wherein the self is completely illusory, okay? That is not the teaching that I got in Zen. Over and over and over, my teacher would say the self arises and it dies. It is born and it dies, moment after moment after moment. And it arises from the coming together of opposing but complementary opposites inside and outside. Or we could say human nervous system and stimulation from the outside. Bing, they come together, there's a kind of friction, and that complex, amazing, miraculous friction that arises is the I am. And the I am looks at the inside and it can see and feel feelings and thoughts and emotions and memories and desires. And it looks at the outside and can see trees and apples and people and sitcoms, lampshades. So the teaching is never that there is no self. The teaching is, if you look and investigate within yourself the things that you think are I, me, my, what will happen is they'll slip through your fingers. And the reason this teaching is important to me is that it gives me confidence to look at my inner life with an objective eye and to look at the world around me with a sense of engagement or subjectivity. By destabilizing that belief in self, I'm able to, there's a kind of power in it for me, or a freeing of energy that, like I said, allows me to see my inner life objectively and therefore not get swallowed in it, and to see the outer world subjectively, which is to say, with love and compassion and a kind of understanding instead of a separation from it, a fearful and angry and desirous separation. Okay, what the F is Zen? Here's what Zen is. Buddhism came from India to China, and the Chinese looked at these teachings from India, like the ones I just read from you in the sutras, and they said, what the hell is this? This is not practical, this is not earthy, this does not jive with our Confucian tradition. We're going to take this and we're going to make it our own. And the Chinese opened their mouths and opened their hearts and wiggled their toes and took Indian Buddhism and consumed it and then manifested it in a completely different way, which was called Shan, all right? Now, the Japanese took Shan and they systematized it, like only the Japanese can. They took these earthy but maybe too homemade teachings from the Chinese Zen tradition, and they said, look, there's some interesting stuff going on here. See this interaction between this Zen master and this student? There is a principle being manifested there. I mean, I am really oversimplifying, and y'all are going to comment in the comment section about how this is not according to the history of Zen, but I really don't care. We're going to get this clear. So the Japanese systematized the Chinese way of teaching Buddhism. And they, for example, turned it into koan practice. And they turned it into form. And they turned it into formal meals. And they turned it into all of monastic life, right? Again, systematized. And God bless the Japanese Rinzai Zen masters for doing this. Because there is something being done here that is unique. When I read Christian mystics, I do not see a systematized approach to this ineffable, if we can call it understanding. There are metaphors, there are words on a page by St. John and his Dark Night of the Soul, or Meister Eckhart, or the Cloud of Unknowing, right? And when I read the ancient Chinese Chan texts, I see teachings, right? But when I went to the monastery, all of that, the kind of a mysticism, like it seemed to me that the Japanese Rinzai Zen masters systematized an approach to mysticism, okay? And I can't think of any other tradition that does this as cleanly and as clearly as the Japanese Zen masters. But the result is a very strange combination of things. You've got a systematized approach that is incredibly practical and down to earth and completely esoteric in many ways at the same time. And it's very hard to grasp. So what does that mean, systematizing mysticism? My friend Dave here says that, he says, practicing the Four Noble Truths, especially the Eightfold Path, is a more direct and helpful way of approaching life than the rather nebulous techniques of Zen. So he says, when the excrement hits the spinning blades, what would Zen have me do? When the rubber hits the road, realizing emptiness or being totally present is just not helpful. So this is incorrect. This is wrong. I don't know where Dave got these teachings from, but they're just words. So systematizing mysticism, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to manifest emptiness? No Zen teacher is going to say that unless they have to. And then they're going to negate what they just said because it's just words. So let's talk about koan practice. For example, koan practice is so completely and totally misunderstood that it almost just shouldn't be done anymore. So let's talk about what happens during koan meeting. And I'm going to time travel back to the monastery. And I get off my cushion and I go through all the bells and whistles because there is so much form. And I've got to bow and I've got to bring my hands together and do this. And I've got to go down on my hands and knees, and I've got to do my full bows to my teacher. I've got to give him one bow. And by now, he has already completely seen the whole picture. We've already done koan practice, and I haven't even entered the room yet because I've gone through the dance and through the choreography, and I've manifested all kinds of things with my body. Have I dissolved into, have I done the bow? You know, the bows are so boring, and they've been done for so many years because you can say a lot with the bows. Koan practice and Zen itself is a kind of language. It's a kind of Japanese body language for the, I'm using the word mystical now, so I'm just going to use it, for this mystical path. It's the embodiment of mysticism, right? So already the teacher knows if you've spoken the words correctly when you do those bows, when you come in. And then you do the thank you bow, which is your hands are in a triangle and you put your forehead in between, you know? And then you give him the answer. You present the koan to him and you give him the answer to the koan. Now, there's something my teacher would do, which I've talked about endlessly. He would reach out his hand. A very basic thing, okay? So we are not in the realm of realizing emptiness. Nowhere is emptiness being realized. A hand is being extended. What does one do in such a circumstance? To answer this koan, one takes the hand and shakes it. And that's it, actually, that's it. You shake the hand. That's it. It's a very profound teaching. It's a very profound teaching. And I will take it to my grave. There's nothing else to be done but life to be lived. There are no Four Noble Truths. There is no Eightfold Path. You can reduce... I have another video about this, which I've been editing, which eventually I'll put up. But you can reduce the Four Noble Truths, as well as the Eightfold Path, to one word, manifest. And then you got to get rid of that word and do it. That's what manifest means. And doing the action completely, whatever the action is how you manifest. And you die into that activity, whether it's brushing your teeth, talking to a camera, sitting on a chair, greeting your loved one, sending an email, thumbing your stupid phone and sending a text. Every action is God manifesting in the world. Every action is Buddha nature, here and now arising. And we just don't see it. So this is what I mean by mysticism and systematizing mysticism. And it's a very difficult and strange set of teachings and practices. And my friend Dave hit a wall in his practice that is exactly similar to a wall that I hit and that all of us hit. And that you're probably hitting right now. Because what do you do with any of this? There's just nothing to grab onto in Zen practice. You know, I was researching today the Theravadan tradition and the Zen response to the Theravadan tradition, and we find Huang Po, who says basically these guys, these Theravadan monks, are not truly manifesting Mu, I guess you could say. They're not manifesting the source. I should probably cut this because Huang Po says that the Theravadins cannot lose themselves utterly in Bodhi. Okay, so there's the danger that demons may come and pluck them from within the orbit of Bodhi itself. And this is kind of a common, somewhat aggressive Zen approach to spirituality. If you attach to any words or any teachings whatsoever, you will not be doing, you will not be manifesting, you will be inside the problem still of craving, okay, of the cause of suffering. You're still trying to fix and fixate and change and understand and find ground. And when you do that, you're in your own way and you're not manifesting Bodhi, as Huang Po calls it, or true love, as my Zen teacher used to call it. And true love is when the self is gone. And when you're shaking that hand, there's not a little part of you thinking, am I answering this koan right? There's not a little part of you uncomfortable with touch. And I'm telling you, this happens. There's a hitting of hand upon hand where you don't know have you ever had that moment when you're making love and suddenly you see yourself as your partner and you feel like you're being penetrated or you're penetrating, even though you're doing the opposite activity. This is a bad analogy, but there is a connection wherein that separation that haunts life, especially the contemporary West and probably contemporary everywhere, that separation from the world around us is gone. And true love or relationship arises, as my teacher would have called it, where there's no difference between self and other. And fundamentally, I guess this is my point in this long video, is that it's an experience. It's an experience. And Zen is radical because again and again and again, it attacks words. It attacks words and uses words to deconstruct words and unravel teachings and give us nothing to hold on to. And the emptiness, I think, that Zen speaks of a lot of the time is just simply pulling the rug out from under us so that we don't cling to and attach to words and teachings. Okay, Dave, I did this for 13 years, and by the end of my training as a Zen monk, I was a bit off. Maybe I'm still a bit off. I was unstable. I had Zen sickness, and a lot of people get this. Something revolts inside you because these Zen dudes just keep negating. A friend of mine went to a retreat recently with a new Roshi. And a friend of mine is practically a Roshi himself. And yet, this teacher attacked him and attacked everybody. And that's what the role of the Rinzai Zen Roshi, it seems to me, oftentimes is. To pull the rug out from under you again and again and again. My teacher was merciless in this activity. Merciless. He just never affirmed any of our ideas, any of our desire to have ground, because the teaching was no attachment, freedom, like pure freedom. And that is a radical teaching. It's really radical, but it's just a teaching. Like, that's the thing that you gotta realize in the end. These guys are just in a role. It's a role, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. So you have to do this weird thing as a Zen practitioner. You have to accept yourself. You're conditioned self. It's a weird, almost counterintuitive judo that goes against everything that I just said. So there was a phase in my practice, at any rate, of negating myself. And yet, in doing that, never really negating myself and getting kind of sicker and angrier. And then I walked away from practice and I smoked some cigarettes and I wrote beautiful sentences and I read and I met my girlfriend, and then, like, through the scorched earth, these little green shoots came up, you know? And they were fresh and clean, and little green shoots are like feelings, and they never stop coming up now. And when I start overemphasizing me, the little green shoots begin to shrivel. And then I remember that firm, fierce, utterly uncompromising love that my teacher showed me. And there's a letting go of that impulse that's very deep down to fixate myself, to have very firm ground to stand on, and firm fingers to reach out in the world and grab things with. That kind of dissolves. And again, there's a freedom, if you will, to just let experience happen. So this is, and the experience is the little green shoots of life without my manipulating and grabbing and controlling. You know, but oh man. Oof. Every student of Zen practice has to walk away from Zen practice at some point because it's totally and completely crazy. It's crazy making. I remember when I got really sick at the monastery. There was a monk who got fired from his job as the shika, which was the head monk, and I had only been at the monastery for 2 years. I was not able to manifest with maturity in the role of head monk, but nonetheless I was thrown into that position because the only other option was this crazy monk, and my teacher fired him and threw me into the role. It was very stressful, and I got sick, really sick. I don't know if the two are related, but all I know is that at the sort of the height of my initial phase as shika, I got pancreatitis, and it was death. I was dying. And I went to the hospital, and I was in the hospital for it was like a week. And midway through, Roshi came to visit me. And I had this experience with him that I'll never forget, okay? Like, I was laying in the bed, and he came into the room. And he was, you know, he's 100 some odd years old then, 102 or 3. And he got wheeled in on his wheelchair, and I remember him. So I had a little bit of dilaudid in my system. So I was feeling perky and brave, and I looked at him. This all happened within like a fraction of a second. I looked at him with pleading eyes. Just, it was really quick. Like I looked at him with a kind of a look that to me meant like, Daddy, like affirm me. Just once, just affirm something that I'm doing, that I'm feeling, right? Like I almost died, okay? I literally almost died. And all I wanted was a tiny bit of affirmation, right? And I looked at him with that look, and I had that feeling inside me. And he saw me. He looked right in my eyes, and he looked away. Like, I mean, this all happened with like a fraction of a second. And I like watched this happen, like, and I watched him see my need for affirmation, recognize it, and then grow fierce and turn away. And that, later on, 10 years later, 5 years later, my teacher said, "Oh, when you were sick, I think you no longer stay monk." Because I went home then for like 3 months to Wisconsin and just convalesced. And very seriously considered leaving the Zen path. And was told I should leave the Zen path by everybody. By psychologists and by a doctor and my brother. My parents were oddly silent on the matter. And Roshi said, when I came back, he said, I thought when he made me an Osho and a priest, he only made a very few number of his monks priests. And he said, I made you a priest because you came back. And, you know, when I came back, it was very clear to me that nothing I could ever do would ever be affirmed. And I got it. I got it. Yeah, nothing I do can ever be affirmed. Ever. And that means I'm free. Free from myself and free to be myself. That's the funny thing. Like, whatever you are is okay because it's not fundamental anyway. It's not absolute. It's not what my Christian upbringing told me. There are stakes if you do this behavior. You could go to heaven or you could go to hell. No. False. False teaching. Zen is radical because it teaches this freedom. Freedom. Freedom from suffering. And suffering comes from craving or attachment. And the ultimate attachment is to our, at least in my case, to myself, to my ideas about what will affirm me and complete me and make me happy, productive, and fulfilled. That's the ultimate attachment. And that self that I'm attaching to, it's like Ouroboros. It's if you attach to it, you consume it. You consume your own tail. Much of the suffering all of the suffering that I have experienced in my life comes from that, being stuck to some idea of how things should be on the inside of me and how things should be on the outside of me. Me, me, me. That's the center of the problem. This is a radical teaching. It is a dangerous teaching. It's dangerous. It is. I mean, it really is. And that's why I think people, if you don't leave Zen practice at some point, even when you just leave the Zendo, like if you gotta drop Zen practice and enjoy your life a little bit and just affirm the world around you and let the world affirm you. Otherwise, it's I don't know, it's like drinking bleach, like you blast everything. And that was what my teacher did. He blasted everything. Every affirmative notion of the self, he would blast and bleach and attack and smash and kick right out of existence. And yet the guy was so much fun. He was so full of life. And oftentimes he affirmed my wimpy little ass again and again and again and again. And I would just, smile. And I wouldn't take it seriously, because the second I took it seriously, like, he would smack me. Literally. I mean, I didn't let him do it, but I would watch him do it to other people. Like, he would affirm them. He would say, you very so tall and handsome. He had a thing about physical beauty. So some guy would walk in, you're a very handsome boy. And the guy would be like, oh yeah. And he'd be like, yeah, but to attach you're handsome, to attach, vain, you vain. Like any time you took it that extra step and let the affirmation affirm you instead of feed you, you let it affirm you and coagulate, you were smacked. And that's Zen. I'm grateful that these old Japanese Zen masters systematized mysticism, gave us these monasteries which produced the flowers of these great teachers and created an approach to eating and to sitting and to working and to talking and to relating and handshaking that is a way of bringing the ineffable into making it born. But the teachings can't be grabbed. They can't be manipulated. They must be held loosely, very, very loosely, and taken very seriously, while not taking oneself seriously within them. It's a strange balancing act that we call the middle way in Buddhism. Now I've spoken too much. I'm done. I apologize for this video. Whenever I have something to say, it's always a disaster. I wasted too much of your time. I'm done. Forgive me, I am not a Zen master. Zen masters do not talk like this. I did not receive Inca from my teacher. So I do not have permission to give teishos, which are teachings that engage with the Buddhist tradition and the Zen tradition on an equal level. All I can do is talk about my own experience. And oftentimes I just go straight up my own ass when I do that. But I hope there was something in this presentation today to give one dude's experience of Zen. And if we have anything to take away from today's teaching, it is that I cannot ever release the teachings from my heart, and one has to completely let go of the teachings and release them from one's heart at the same time. So good luck with that. If you like these obscure and esoteric ramblings, you can go here to patreon.com/ShozanJackHobner and support this channel. We're doing sits there, which are really helpful. I'm going to do more of these sits now. So instructions are given during these meditation sits. Before the meditation sits, we do 2 sits, and then afterwards I talk a little bit about sitting. And it's a great way, we do these on Sunday, and it's a great way to orient, I find it a great way to orient myself for the week ahead, to sit down, settle, breathe, clear my head, focus my body, do Zazen. So that's part of what I offer through patreon.com. I've also got a bunch of essays there, personal essays, which at some point I'm going to gather into a book. And there's a nice little community there that comments on my talks and gives me stuff to think about, like my friend Dave did for this talk. So anyways, you can go to patreon.com/ShozanJackHobner to support this channel. You can also support this channel through PayPal. And there's a link in the video description below. You can hit like, hit subscribe, hit notifications. Otherwise, friends, I'll see you later. Tschüss. What a dumb video. Jesus Christ.